You thought we'd never make it. Hebrews chapter 13. We're at the very end of the book here, the book of Hebrews. Sometimes, although I didn't feel like this one went too overly long. Sometimes you can get into a book study and you know, it took longer to study it than it did for the entire New Testament to be written. But anyway, we've been looking at this book. It's interesting because Hebrews chapter 13 changes the dynamic of the conversation a little bit. Because really what he's done from chapter 1 through chapter 12, two main themes. I'll say it probably one last time, but two main themes from chapter 1 to chapter 12. They are the Jesus is supreme and don't give up, don't quit, right? Those are the two basic themes that he just finds different ways to make arguments about in relationship. They were giving up on Jesus in what direction? Yeah, going back to Judaism, right? They were going back to the Old Testament law was the way they were going back, and we've shared examples of how we might do the same. Just the circumstances and content might be slightly different. But before we get into chapter 13 tonight, if you would, let's bow our heads together. We'll share in a word of prayer before our study begins. Our Father in heaven, thank you for the day you've blessed us with, an opportunity to worship and serve you today. For your wisdom and the guidance you provide through your testimony. Give us a heart that's receptive to your message tonight and wants to learn more and more and appreciate more from your word. Thank you again for your guidance. Thank you for Jesus. Thank you for the hope and promise that can only be found in him. And give us the courage to want to just honor everything that he and you lead us to. Again, thank you for all the blessings of life you grant to us and strengthen us in our study this evening. And we pray this through Christ's name. Amen. Okay, so what he does, I would say differently in the last chapter is he basically goes, okay, let me tell you all kinds of things that I would like to have told you, but I didn't have time, right? And so you get just one after another, one last thought here, one last thought there, and it's just a continual kind of barrage, if you will, as it relates to the final thoughts that he wants to share with them. He's going to make an interesting picture of sacrifice I think we need to look at before we're done here in chapter 13. Especially later in the chapter, he's going to make reference to sacrifice. And I want to make sure we kind of catch it and catch the comparison thoughts maybe that we ought to think about when it relates to that. But really, in this chapter, he just starts giving us some final affirmations, some final commendations, some final exhortations, if you will, whatever you want to call them. And they kind of come rapid fire, and they come not necessarily directly connected to all of the things that he had said before. And he begins in the very beginning of the chapter by simply saying, let brotherly love continue, right? We talked a little bit in our study that much of the book is about personal accountability, right? Much of what he writes to them is about their own personal choice to make sure they maintain relationship with Jesus. Don't give up on your relationship with him. The only thing of real value is what he provides. And he gives them all kinds of reasons why to stay steadfast in that. Not really until you get to about chapter 10 does he have about how they can help each other do that. But that's the chapter when he commends to do what? Provoke one another unto love and good works, and do it even more as you see the day approaching. And we talked about what that see the day approaching might mean, and we had a pretty healthy discussion a couple of different times as it relates to that. But in chapter 10 is one of those moments where he kind of gives them a little bit of conversation about how they could help each other fulfill what it is the writer's trying to encourage them in. And so here towards the end, he comes back to that kind of thinking and reminds them a little bit of some things that they need to be thinking about as it relates to how they help and encourage one another. And the first thing he mentions is let brotherly love continue. Can I ask you just to think with me for a second, because he qualifies it. What's the difference between brotherly love and love? I mean, well, let me ask it this way. Can you name me other types of love? Sure. Okay. Charity would be a form of love that is in benevolent kind of ways that you'd help others. So there's that form of love. What other kinds of love do you think about? Okay, we might even call that romantic love, right? Between a husband and a wife, you might see that kind of love. What else? Okay, and that's that definitive, right? That Greek word that talks about love shown by its actions. When you think about that, go ahead, Gary. Was it? Oh, did I hear something else over here? I'm sorry. I thought I heard. Okay, friendship and kinship, right? There's this connectivity that he wants us to see. So love between husband and wife is different, but then love between parent to child, love between yourself and your coworker is different than love between you and your spouse, right? You can see there's contrast, differences between how we love each other. And the writer says there's a kind of love that's important to brethren, and he simply defines it as brotherly love. It's a love that comes out of the relationship that we have to each other. Let me take your minds back for a minute. If we were accurate in our description of this being written prior to what great event in Jerusalem? Yeah, destruction in 70 AD, right? So if we are accurate in placing the writing of Hebrews, and I think I've given pretty solid circumstantial evidence that it is, and the most glaring reason why it's most likely written prior to 70 AD is because he's writing to Hebrews and he doesn't what? He doesn't mention it, right? If he's writing to a Jewish audience and 70 AD has already occurred, it comes up in the conversation, right? It's going to come up in the conversation. So what's my point? My point is we had some lengthy discussions about some of the challenges that were going to start coming upon them as 70 AD approaches. That calamity, that destructive force that finally comes upon them doesn't happen just one day all of a sudden, right? It happens over a period of time. And over a period of time, as I get hungry, the temptation might be to what? Okay, to think about your needs before other. And I simply try and get your minds there. This isn't just whimsical, let me think of 10 or 12 things I should tell these folks before I, get done with this letter. There's reason why he's saying this. And if I'm understanding time period, historical narrative, all the things that are the backdrop of this letter, the temptation might be to get very, very self-absorbed when the calamities start happening, when food is scarce, when the situation gets harsh, and it might be tempting to fracture your relationships with your brethren because you're going to become very, very personally involved. And so he reminds them, before that happens, right, before the potentiality of those kinds of things occurring to them, he says, let brotherly love continue. Then add the next phrase, be not forgetful to entertain strangers. If you remember some of the prophecies Jesus talked about when he spoke about this destruction of Jerusalem that was coming, you remember he said, woe unto, there was several groups, I believe, if you go back and look, that he said, woe to you if you were pregnant, right? He said, woe to those who are with child. Anybody remember some of the others? Okay. And by the way, I wouldn't be bringing it up if it wasn't right there. I believe one of the things is, woe unto the man who's a stranger, who happened to get caught up in the midst of all this challenge that's going on in Jerusalem. First and foremost, when these situations come up, let brotherly love continue. Don't abandon your brethren, right? Don't abandon your brethren when you see these challenges coming and the harshness of those circumstances that might tempt you to kind of become self-absorbed. Secondly, there may be a stranger there, right? There may be a foreigner who doesn't have the resources, the connectivity. He doesn't have the ability to be able to find the needs and assistance that he is looking for. Don't forget to entertain him either. Help those you know, even help those you don't know. For thereby some have even entertained angels unawares. Now, I'm be glad to walk that road with you for a minute here about these angels unawares. I think if we're not careful, though, we can get caught up in the phrase and miss the point. The point is, you don't know who you may be helping. That's his point. His point isn't try to create some kind of theology about angels, right? The writer's his subject matter isn't angels. His subject matter is how we treat one another. And he reminds them as an illustration of that some have even entertained angels and didn't even know it along the way. So be careful to not just push aside people who might be strangers or foreigners or not necessarily personally connected to you, because throughout history there have been some who have even entertained angels and didn't even know it. That's the point he's making. Not a effort to try to give us some kind of definitive understanding of what angels are. That's not his topic at all. Go ahead, Danny.
I just looked up what Peter wrote about brotherly love. I'll share with you.
Sure, go ahead.
In chapter 1, verse 22, seeing ye have purified your souls in obeying the truth through the Spirit, unto unfeigned love of the brethren, see that ye love one another with a pure heart fervently.
Yeah. And Peter helps us appreciate that the purity and the realness of that love towards one another. Not unfeigned, not faked, right? That's the idea there. Not something that we just do out of rote or pattern, but something that's meaningful to people. Because you don't know. Help your brothers. You can even entertain angels unaware when you help strangers. You don't know what purpose that person might be able to fulfill or moving forward in their lives. And so this has some very specific, I think, context to them, but it's very applicable to us as well, that we should be doing the very same things. Brotherly love should be something that should continue. It's perpetual. And for it to be perpetual or continual, then it's got to become what? Got to become part of you. It can't be compartmentalized where we offer that here and then time goes by and we'll offer a little more later. No, for it to be something that's continual or perpetual, it's got to become part of your character, become part of the way you think about things. It's not well, I entertained a stranger a couple of months ago, right? It's more of just how we react to the circumstances and situations we find ourselves in as it relates to brothers in Christ, as it relates to the stranger, as it relates to whomever we might be able to be of some aid or assistance to. Go ahead, Sue.
With that thought, you said Christians, so angels are messengers. It could be such a thing that we are all messengers. So in the context that it's written, is that thereby some have entertained Christians unaware. Yeah. Maybe we helped a brother or sister didn't know it.
Yeah. And I think that principle is there, right? You just be helpful, because you don't know what the circumstance, situation, or status of that individual might be, and what you might be able to aid or promote moving forward. I know of conversions that have happened because somebody took the time to help a stranger, that then opened the door, that then led to somebody learning who Jesus was. And so you just don't know what the outcomes might be. And so he just encourages them to be this way. Allow themselves to be this way. Yep, go ahead, Bob.
I think a lot of this is directed towards Abraham and Lot in Genesis 18 and 19, where they entertained him. with strangers.
Yeah.
But think about it, in our situation today, to entertain strangers could be a very hazardous position.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to get into the subject of angels because that's going down another road.
Right.
But the thing of entertaining a stranger, if it's maybe a member of a congregation that's not here, you know, visiting or something like that, I can understand that. But just to pick somebody out at random, you know, as a stranger to bring him into your home, I don't know.
Right. Well, and I don't know that this text is implying to what degree or what level that you would entertain strangers, and obviously their world is far different than our world. But there are ways, right, to be of help without necessarily endangering yourself in the process.
With Abraham and Lot is the fact that there is no inns. They was going to sleep in streets.
Right.
And,
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is what I was referring to.
Yeah, and such would have been the case.
Bringing them into their house as the entertainment.
Sure. And such would have been the case in those days, where there would have been people within their communities that they might have been able to identify as belonging or had a rightful purpose of being there, but needed assistance while they were there. I mean, to me, in some ways, the biggest example of that is all those Jews who had flooded into Jerusalem during Pentecost, heard about Jesus, and didn't go home. And now all of a sudden, how are we going to feed all these strangers, right? How are we going to take care of all these people who came into the Jerusalem, stayed, and people started selling their houses. They started selling their possessions, taking up the collection to be able to assist those who had need. I think that's the mindset he's just trying to encourage these folks to maintain, that generosity and willingness to help. Go ahead, Colin.
Reminds me of a story that Jesus told in Matthew 25, starting in verse 34. Then shall the king say unto them unto his right hand, Come ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungered, and ye gave me meat, and I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in, naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, you came unto me. Then shall the righteous answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry, and fed you, and thirsty, and gave you drink? When saw we a stranger, and took thee in, and naked, or clothed thee? And jumping to verse 40, and the king shall answer and say unto them, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye have done it to one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me.
Right. So this is very much just an implementation of what Jesus had already taught and instructed folks in earlier text. Go, sir.
I missed your discussion on verse 1, but the writer's telling us that brotherly love is more than words.
Yeah.
And then he goes on, and you may have already went over that. But it's more than just words. And then he goes on and he basically lists these things by ways of showing what brotherly love is.
Yeah. And so he's going to describe manners in which you can portray the things that he's defining for them, and you see that begin to outline throughout the text.
Today, we might say, oh, we'll consider that idea. We'll entertain that idea.
Yeah.
And here, if you take the word entertain and put consider in there, it simply is all those things we've already talked about. Consider those strangers
to be
in
considerate
their
of.
position
Sure.
they might be in.
Sure. So then he lists some specifics, beginning in verse 3. He said, Remember them that are in bonds, and in what manner? Yeah, imprisonment, but in what way should they remember? In what manner should they remember? As if they were what? If they were bound as well, right there with them. And them which suffer adversity, as being yourselves also in the body. When a member of the body hurts, we all hurt. When a member of the body's joyful, we're all joyful, right? That's the principles that Jesus had tried to teach his followers. He's reminding these individuals that he's writing to that listen, you may not be the one imprisoned somewhere, but stay faithful to those who are as if you were the one in need of encouragement and strength and help because of the situation you found yourself in. You may not be the one who's suffering the immediate adversity. Do we know exactly where this letter was sent? No, right? All we know is the who, and the only thing we know about the who, it's a group, right? It's a group of people, right? It's an oddity among the letters and when it comes to that. Because the other letters are basically either written to an individual or written to an individual church, right? That's generally what we see in the epistles. But this is written not to a specific individual, to our knowledge, not to a specific church, but rather a group of people who had decided to leave Judaism, come into Christianity, but have been discouraged along the way and turn from that. And I remind you of that for this reason. Depending on where you might find yourself as one who was once in Judaism, left and came into Christianity, you may not face the same levels of adversity. If I'm in Jerusalem, it's going to get bad within a decade or so, right? Not long after this writing, if I'm a Jewish Christian in Jerusalem, I'm going to get caught up in the midst of all that calamity. My adversities are going to be far worse than somebody, say, who's living a distance away from Jerusalem. But he reminds all of them that it is an equal experience irregardless for all of them. When your brethren are bound, you are bound. When your brethren are in adversity, you are in adversity. When they suffer, you suffer. That's the imagery that he's trying to drive at. Go ahead, Mike.
I prayed for him. I've
Sure.
seen it happen.
Sure.
I've seen lives change through prayer.
Sure. And there's all kinds of ways, right, to be of encouragement. I may not be able to break him out of prison, but at minimum, I can continue to beseech the Father.
We saw this with Paul when he was in prison and letters that helped
Sure.
get him through everything.
Yeah.
And very often, many of those people were writing and they're like, we're praying for you. We are
Sure.
consistently keeping you in our thoughts and our minds, and your suffering is our suffering.
Sure. And you see that visibly occur with those. Appreciate those things. Now, I've tried to figure out how verse 4 plays into this conversation. And I think it's, in some ways, it's just his continuing encouragement to them to remember certain guidelines, if you will, instructions, commands that came through Jesus. Let brotherly love continue. Don't forget to be considerate and to entertain strangers, because you don't know who you might be helping at any time. Remember that you may not be the one personally involved in some challenge or difficulty, but you still should be compassionate towards that and experience it as if you were. Then he jumps topics a little bit. Verse 4, marriage is honorable in all, and the bed undefiled, but whoremongers and adulterers God will judge. Well, let me offer it first. I can tell you how I think this fits in context, but I don't want to tell you until I give you a chance. Can we understand the principle, by the way? We can start there. Right? Is the statement true? Yes, marriage is honorable, and the bed undefiled. And adulterers and whoremongers, God has always brought judgment against, right? We can cite case after case, site after site, moment after moment in text of Scripture that illustrates that. So I don't want you to think that I'm trying to escape the basic fact of what he says. But I'm trying to understand it in light of where he said it and and so your thoughts maybe.
Chapters going over Jesus supreme. Now he's going, love your brother, love your wife.
Yeah.
It's almost like the 10.
Yeah.
It's almost laying it out like, you want him to go back,
Yeah.
don't go back. Stay where we're at and stay the course. Because Jesus even said, these were the foundation, we're moving on from here.
Yeah. Yeah. So turning back away from Jesus isn't, in some ways, isn't all of what he's saying. He's not just saying, don't do this, but he's also saying, keep moving forward in our responsibilities that Jesus will outline for us, and he's just kind of picking a handful of things to remind them of. Yep, that fits.
As well, it's like he said, love your brother. Show love to strangers, and remembering them. Your wife. Show love to family, to brethren in the church.
Yeah.
Keep them in your mind. Understand their suffering. And even if you go down in other verses, first 5 letters, version be like covetous. If you'll love someone, you're not going to be covetous of what they have.
Right.
Well, of the 2 great commands, one was to love your God and have no other God before him. The second is to love your neighbor as you love yourself. Love's the foundation of everything.
Sure. And I think you're seeing that here in relationship to that. Go ahead, Zoom.
This isn't the only writer that just out of the blue throws something in there, you wonder how it got there. The way I've always looked at it, as a writer, if I'm writing about something, I'm not a writer, but when I write about something, a lot of times I write down something that may be of concern at that time. So that's the way I look at a lot of those in the Bible, where just out of no place, the topics change for one verse. It might be that's something that was on the writer's mind. He sees it, and so he puts it in there.
Yeah.
I mean, that's,
Yeah. And all that works.
It's going off of the whole topic of love. If we look through chapter 13, verses 1 and 2, talking about let brotherly love continue, and having love for strangers. And here it's saying, verse 4, marriage, love for your wife is honorable, but there's also a wrong kind of love, which is the whoremongers and adulterers. And it's saying, don't fall into that. Yes, still love your neighbors and love strangers, but don't fall into that wrong kind of love, which the whoremongers and the adulterers have done, because God's going to judge those people accordingly.
Okay. So it could be a contrast from the things that he's been saying before. Go ahead, Bob.
Clark had a thing on this, and he said that at this time back then, there was marriages in the clergy, and that was dishonorable, and which is against the apostles' teaching, that marriage is honorable in all. And I think it's just a simple thing that all marriage is an honorable state for everybody.
Yeah. And so all this is absolutely in line with what the text is talking about. Entertain my thought for a second. So is that verse? Just read it again, and I didn't read every translation, but just look at it again and tell me: is it a commendation, a warning, or a statement of fact? That's interesting, isn't it? It's a statement of fact. He doesn't say, now don't dishonor your marriages, right? That's not how he said it. He didn't say, make sure you keep your marriage pure. That's not what he said. He made a statement of fact. And the fact that he makes is marriage is honorable in all, and the bed undefiled, a statement of fact. But whoremongers and adulterers God will judge, statement of fact. What do you do if you are attached to the bride, if you're the bride of Christ, and you depart and leave Jesus? you adulterate the relationship. Right? Remember, and a lot of times people struggle with this, and you've heard me talk about this. Don't confuse fornication and adultery. They are two distinctive things. Fornication is an act of the flesh. Fornication both are condemned, by the way. Don't make sure you understand me. But don't conflict them or use them interchangeably. Adultery is about covenant, right? Adultery is about covenant. Why is it that God said that the nation adulterated their relationship with Him? What had they done to do that? They had broken the covenant. What makes me an adulterer is the breaking of the covenant. Fornication leads me there, right? It's part of that conversation, but they're two different words, two different meanings, two different reasons that they're used in text. My point is, if I can, and maybe it is just him, just things he wants to share, reminders of what, right? It could be all those things. I'm not disagreeing with anybody who spoke up, but when I was trying to figure out, okay, how does it fit here? And I got to think about, what were they doing? They were adulterating their relationship with Jesus by going back into the Old Testament system. So he reminds them, listen, guys, marriage is honorable. You know this. Marriage should be kept pure. The bed is something that's undefiled. This is something that should be maintained with purity. And God has never approved of whoremongers and adulterers. In fact, God has always brought judgment in relationship to those things. Don't adulterate your relationship with Jesus. Food for thought. Go home and think about it. Just something that I was thinking of when I was looking through this text. Go ahead.
Can you repeat what you had just said there about fornication is different from adultery?
Yeah.
Can you explain a little more?
So simply all I'm saying is they're not interchangeable words. They have completely different meanings. Fornication is sexual immorality. It's a fleshly physical action of sexual immorality. And it comes in various types, forms, right? The Bible speaks about various things that would be defined as fornication. Adultery is about when any covenant, it can be used in marriage, it can be used in our relationship with God, it can be used in our relationship with Jesus and the church. Adultery is about covenant breaking. And God doesn't approve of either one, by the way, and so they're both wrong in the eyes of God. But sometimes we might say, well, somebody committed one or the other, and if they're not married, it's fornication, right? If there's a marriage involved and fornication occurs, then one party could be guilty of breaking the covenant. That's adultery. They've committed both. So somebody can commit one so if I'm unmarried, I can commit fornication, but I can't commit adultery because I have no covenant. If I'm married and I commit fornication, now I've broken the covenant, I've committed two sins. I've done two different things. So I don't want you to think they don't occur simultaneously sometimes when it comes to married people. I'm just saying they're two different definitions, and it's two different issues that has to be addressed when it comes to it. Does that help?
I think that you brought up how it's not really a commendation or a warning, but it's just a statement of fact. I think it would be more of a mixture between a statement of fact and a warning, because you talked about how he's probably bringing this up because of the fact that they're committing almost adultery with the covenant between Jesus and the people. But I think it's also a warning saying, hey, since you may be committing adultery between the covenant of Jesus and people, you will be judged.
And certainly they need to understand the warning side of that. It's just not the type of language he uses here in that moment. Any other thoughts? I wasn't trying to chase a rabbit here, but just trying to get you to think about that. That when, because right, what are we talking? What's the whole conversation been about? Why are you going back to the Old Testament covenant when you've been given a new covenant in Jesus? His entire letter's been about that. And so he reminds them of this fact about the judgment of God that comes when people break covenants. And anyway, it seemed to fit. It fit better for me, even though I understand the principles in both directions. I can understand the general principle that he's teaching as well. Marriage is honorable, and the bed should be undefiled. And people need to be cautious that they don't adulterate their relationships because God has judged. I'm not denying any of that. I'm just trying to see how it fit in the conversation. So let your conversation be without covetousness, in verse 5. And be content with such things as you have. For he has said, I will never leave thee, nor forsake thee. Again, I'm not trying to put thoughts in your head that you never thought about. But we sometimes come to this text and we don't ever think about it in light of what the letter's about. We start making applications. And so if you knew nothing about Hebrews 1 through 12, or 1 through 13, verse 4, and nothing from verse 6 to the end of chapter 13, what would you assume he's talking about in verse 5? All right, personal belongings and wealth, right? That's generally where our mind goes. That's what people get covetous over. They can also get covetous of other people's wives or husbands. They can get covetous of other people's social status. Covetousness can go in a longer, have various thoughts, but remember, let your conversation be without covetousness. Let your conversation, your way of living, maybe you could say that. Let your way of living, let your conversation be without covetousness, and be content with such things as you have. What's he been telling them the entire book to be satisfied with? Jesus. Right? Be satisfied with Jesus. You've got the Christ. You've got the Savior. You don't need all these other things. Quit being covetous of what's still happening over there in the Jewish temple, because it's not going to be very long before that Jewish temple is gone. Quit being covetous of your family members that stayed with your traditional, right? Don't be covetous of those who you think have somehow gained an advantage by staying with that Old Testament covenant. Yeah, you've got something far better and new with Jesus. And I'll never what? I'll never leave you. Yeah, I won't forsake you. So that we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper, and I will not fear what man shall do to me. That covetous sounds more like wanting somebody else's conversation, wanting somebody else's way of living, but not just because they drive a better car than I do, right? Not just because they have a bigger house or they take more vacations or whatever it is. Don't be covetous of those who have abandoned Jesus. Don't be covetous of those who've never come to Jesus, because no matter what happens, you stay with me, I'm never leaving you. You stay with me, I'm never forsaking you. You stay with me, and we can boldly say that the Lord is my helper, I will not fear what man shall do unto me. Yeah. And here's what I want us to appreciate. Covetous, again, isn't just about things. I can covet, maybe I covet other people's peace, right? They always seem to have such calm in their life, right? They seem to always have such, they never seem to have storms. There's never chaos. My life feels like one chaotic moment to the next, and they always seem like they're at peace or there's always calm. Number one, it's probably not true. They're probably just good at hiding it, maybe at times. But Jesus says, the writer says, when you've stayed with Jesus, don't get lured into that way of thinking. That somehow there's something out here that you should be coveting that's better than what Jesus is providing. The peace and calm they may seem to have isn't worthy to be compared to what Jesus can provide. Stay the course. His theme hasn't stopped. His don't quit, don't abandon, don't leave theme hasn't stopped. He continues to go. I appreciate all the comments tonight. Thank you for sharing, and give you a couple extra things to go home and crack your Bible open and think about as it relates to the text. And if you don't know anything about me by now, you know that I always like to find some little different nugget to look at once in a while.